What's up, everybody? So here's the thing. Experienced real estate investors are experienced because they've lived through it, the good and the bad, right? But why attend the school of hard knocks if you could just learn from someone else's mistakes? I have learned that it's so much easier to have a bridge rather than to just beat your head against the wall until the lesson gets through. So that's what I'm here to give you everything that I got and help you learn from my mistakes so you don't have to stress out making the same one. So I'm Jonathan Beasley, and I have 6 not so obvious landlord lessons that I learned personally, and it starts now. As always, if this video helps you at all, would you please smash the like button and hit the subscribe bell notification as well? I want to make sure that the content that I'm putting together helps you in some way and it's reaching home to the right people. All right, so let's get into it. Number 1, payments up front in rent can seem like a really awesome thing, right? Somebody's ready to hand you like 6 months or 12 months of rent. You collect a big chunk of money up front and you don't have to worry about your tenants paying on time because they've already paid, right? Except, what do your state's landlord and tenant laws say about collecting upfront rent? Some states actually limit the amount you can collect up front. Other states require you to pay interest on it. So it's very contingent on the locality that you're renting in. And if you don't know, you really need to find out because this can be a big deal and can present some issues for you down the road. Another thing to consider, and this is what I learned firsthand, is what is your tenant's motivation for paying up front? Why do they have a giant wad of cash just sitting around right now? And one of my very first tenants that Rachel and I actually interviewed ourselves and selected, I think it was like our second or third tenant, turned out that his income source was, let's just say, not so above board, if you know what I mean. But even if your prospective resident isn't a drug dealer, what happens when all their upfront rent is gone? So they give you 6 months of rent. What happens at month 7? So there's a good possibility that all the rest of the money will be gone too, and now you're gonna be chasing a tenant who can't afford your rent. Now, there's been other cases where we've collected rent upfront that had legitimate reasons for it. We've had traveling professionals that just got a large bonus or a housing stipend and they just wanted to pay for their whole trip, all 90 days or six months of it up front. In those cases, as long as you can actually legitimize and track the money and why they're doing it, it can be a good thing. But don't necessarily assume that it is a good thing unless you actually can confirm where the money's coming from and why they want to pay up front. Tip number 2, screening hacks. So there are a number of books and articles available that can give you a really good foundation on your tenant and screening process. And here's a side tip. 2A is try to come up with your criteria and keep it consistently. You don't want to get into trouble with discrimination or picking and choosing when you apply certain criteria. So make sure you know what your criteria is and stick with it. But here are a few tips and tricks I've picked up over the years. And these are things that you can do if you're gonna self-manage, or these are things that you can have your property manager do for you, but they're pretty slick. So one of them is when you're leaving the unit after you've done the walkthrough, walk them out to their car and take a peek inside the car. Chances are the way the car looks is the way that your rental unit is gonna look. So if it's full of garbage and full to the brim with crap, that's exactly how your property is gonna look once they've moved in. Another tenant hack, don't ask them if they have animals, ask them how many animals they have, right? Because if you just ask them, do they have an animal, they're probably gonna say no, and you're gonna be chasing them down 6 months later for the pet fees that you should have collected because now their St. Bernard has destroyed the entire unit. You have to redo carpet and flooring and painting. I've seen it 1,000 times and it's not fun. So don't buy the idea either that people have animals, but they're not gonna let the animal live with them, because that's BS as well. Those animals are only going someplace else until they move into your rental, and then bingo is coming home to stay-o, you know what I mean? Number 3, be careful on Craigslist. Unfortunately, there's a super common scam that's happening a lot on Craigslist. We've actually seen this happen to multiple people that we know. Here's how it works. Someone finds your legitimate rental listing. They take your pictures and use it in their own scammy listing. They use their phone number, they use your address and their contact information so that all the phone calls and inquiries get redirected to them. Most commonly, they tell the potential tenant that they're out of the country and can't get the keys to them, so they allow the tenant to hire a locksmith to come in and change all the locks. But in order to allow the tenant access to change the locks, guess what they do? They say, we're gonna need a deposit and first month's rent. And you would be surprised at how many people actually agree to do this. What happens then is the scammer collects the rent, they collect the deposit, and then ditch. And so now you have someone living in your unit that thinks they've already paid their deposit and their first rent. So now what happens is you have a renter in your unit that's already paid a deposit and first month's rent, and they're staying in your place. So how do you keep somebody from stealing your listing? You could use a watermark with your images and your phone number and your contact information. That's definitely gonna make it much more difficult to someone to scam you, because they're not gonna waste their time trying to erase the watermarks and the information from an image. They'll probably just go out and find find another listing that isn't watermarked and scam those people, which that isn't great, but at least you didn't get scammed. Another tip is never publish the actual address of your home. Publish nearest cross streets or other landmarks that are local, and then you can engage with the tenant once you get a feel for them. Tip number 4 is leases. You need a really good solid lease reviewed by an attorney. So that bare bones lease that you found on Google that you got for free because you're being cheap, yeah, that's the quickest way to get sued or to get screwed because your lease doesn't account for issues that are no doubt gonna come up as you gain experience as a landlord. Your lease also can't contradict your state's landlord-tenant laws, which is another reason to have a professional attorney look at it and review it for you. There are plenty of instances that landlord-tenant laws don't cover as well, such as smoking or pets like we talked about, parking, painting the interior of the home. Can the tenant paint the interior of the home? What happens if they don't keep the place clean? We actually just ran into this where somebody was just keeping a terribly unclean, unsanitary rental, and we got in because we had to do a repair, and so now we're walking through what exactly the lease says about that. So, and what's more is if they don't keep it clean and there's bugs, who's responsible for the exterminator fees? So the list goes on, and you want to make sure that your tenant knows exactly what's in the lease and they abide by it. So in order for them to do that, it has to be in your lease in the first place. So once you have a nice long lease, attorney approved lease, make sure you sit down and read through it at least a couple of times. Actually, make sure you understand everything is in it, and then once it's time to present it to your tenant, make sure you read it to them as well. If it matters to you that they abide by the things that you've paid the attorney to write into the lease, I suggest you read it to them and put a line under every paragraph and have them initial it and even highlight the portions that are most important to you. You know, it's a reality that human nature, we all have selective memory. It's just part of the human condition. So being as thorough as you can with your lease will go a long way in making sure that your tenants abide by the things you both agreed to. Tip number 5, can you read minds? Because I can't. Your tenants can't either. So if you want them to know something, you have to tell them, and you have to tell them this in writing. So here in the state of Virginia, email is actually a recognized method of legal notification. And so our team has a cloud-based portal that we essentially email in and out of, and it tracks all communication relative to that unit and that tenant, no matter how minuscule or insignificant it might seem. We capture everything we possibly can in writing. So putting in writing is best because there's really no room for interpretation. It's black and white. It's there for anyone to see, and it will go a long way if there's ever like an argument or a conflict that arises. You have a record that you can refer to, which brings me to number 6, record keeping, but record keeping as it relates to repairs, repair requests, rental ledgers, deposits, and that sort of thing. If you screen properly, let me give you some encouragement. If you screen properly, most of your tenants are going to be really cool folks. They're going to pay on time, and it'll be smooth sailing and good communication. But just to make sure, you need some place to track your deposits and your rent ledgers, whether it's an old school notebook, whether it's a spreadsheet. I got some buddies that just love a good spreadsheet. I hate it. We've chosen a cloud-based software program that tracks each and every payment and each and every communication. So you want to track whether they've made a repair request. You want to mark that down and make sure you mark it when it's completed. Why? Because you want to be able to prove that you've kept good records, and if it's ever in question, you can prove it. Anything that goes on between you and your tenant needs to be documented, no matter how small. When the tenancy ends, if nothing ever happens, you just throw away the notebook, you delete the spreadsheet, or you delete the file from your software. But if you ever need to prove something, believe me, you're gonna thank yourself for having complete records if it ever comes to that. This is your business and you're the leader, so the buck stops with you, so make sure to cover your rear. I'm Jonathan Beasley. I hope you got something out of this. We are trying to create 1,000 new investors. The whole purpose of this YouTube channel is to inspire people to get out of the matrix, give up their 9-to-5, and use real estate investment as a tool to create more freedom and a life of intention. Hope you got something out of this, and we'll see you next week. I'm Jonathan Beasley signing off.